such kind words. I'm especially humbled because I know I'm in the midst of amongst such learned and wise women and interesting and interested women. So I'm just one of the many. I hope to be one of the many. I want to start out by thanking a few people who made this day possible. And I have to tell you, I myself organize salons and conferences in Los Angeles, and I know how much time and dedication it takes to put a successful event together. And as I was talking to Dean Williams, one of the most important things that women can do for one another is not only to offer their support, but also create forums where ideas are exchanged, people get to know each other, and they come back to reconnect. So I really, really appreciate conferences like this. It's so important to us women. And with that, first of all, I want to thank you, Mariam. I know that your introduction to Pepperdine University and my work led to the invitation. I want to thank Vanessa, who has been diligently working on the event. I don't see her, but I'm sure she's somewhere here. Okay, they're back there. Of course, I want to thank Margaret Weber. We exchanged so many emails with one another. Thank you for your coordination, your kindness. Dean Williams, it's such a pleasure to meet you. You know, I can tell by the very few minutes that I've been here, this is a woman who not only has intelligence and character, but a deep soul. And a certain kind of kindness emanates from her. So thank you so much. I really take it to heart. Thank you. And Associate Dean of Education, Martine Jago. Yes. And Autumn Lisinski. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm going to surprise you because as I was sitting and listening to Dean Williams, I started thinking about what I had prepared, and I'm going to veer off. You see, this is what happens when you want to speak in the spirit of the day. So there's some things that you're going to see on my PowerPoint, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But now being here, I get a sense of other things that I would like to discuss. So please bear with me. This is very spontaneous, but this is the way it has to go. That we need to, as you'll see, you know, I have spent the past 10 years researching women's leadership, and it's especially important to me to cover women from different parts of the world. One, I think it's my background. You know, it wasn't too long ago. It feels a long time ago. But when I was a graduate student, and I was at the time pregnant with my first son, and I was at the same time TAing a class for women's studies and ethnic studies. And unbeknownst to me, that really changed the course of my interest in things. When I started doing my thesis, I really wanted to incorporate how gender and culture really affects teamwork and leadership in organizations. So that became the topic, the focus of my thesis. And, you know, I was a professor for 11 years and later on went on to conduct adult personal development workshops. And interestingly enough, I led workshops for a group of women for 6.5 years. That meant that every week, for the first 3 years, they would come for a workshop, we would have reading and share, and we would have goal setting. And then the 3.5 years was every other week. So you can just imagine how much we all change within the course of those years. You know, research shows that every 7 years, not only do we change physically, all cellularly, we shed a lot of things and we recreate ourselves, regenerate ourselves, but even in terms of identity, we are constantly in a state of flux. And I want, if there's anything that I would want you to keep in mind as I'm going through my talk, is that being a leader means that you have to be flexible to adjust. that you have to be open to possibilities. You know, my second book is called Pioneers of the Possible, but that is because I think to be a real leader, and it's not only in the workplace, but in your life or in our lives, we have to have a certain kind of spaciousness and openness to know that we can be bigger than what we are now. We have a seed of potential that will be realized sometime in the future. And that is very important. So after writing my first book, I really started thinking about doing some soul searching. I was doing my book tour with my first book, and I read this research that showed that stories of personal transformation are one of the most effective ways of disseminating a key message to a reader. And I thought about myself, and you know, as Mariam touched on it, I'm Iranian born, but I'm Iranian American. Obviously, at this point, I really think that I'm more American than Iranian in some respects. But growing up, I grew up in a family that was very, very traditional, Middle Eastern family. And around me, I really didn't have any role models that I can look at and say, this is who I want to be. Granted, I want to say that my mom and my sister, and there were incredible women in my family that showed me what character was about, what kindness and heart was about. But I wanted to see, how would I be identifying myself as a woman who would be working outside of the home? And I didn't have anyone around me. And I spent a great part of my teenage years without my parents. So you can just imagine, from age 11 to 16 and a half, I didn't have my parents with me. And I was raised by my older siblings. And I think what pulled me through a lot of those years, and even during my college years, and by the way, I'm a UCLA graduate, I remember all my cool, intelligent friends went to Pepperdine, and I would go to meet them there. So, one of the things that really pulled me through is always having the intention to be around really intelligent women and learning from them. And also biographies. I consume biographies all the time. And I think there is something interesting about that, because we talk about mentorship, and mentorship is a big part of my platform. When I have conferences, we mentor a lot of inner city high potential girls and college students. It's important to be around role models. Mentorship takes different forms. Sometimes it's a one-on-one relationship, but sometimes it's a relationship or a connection you make to a person without even knowing them. I think I had many mentors. So the 2 books I've written on female leaders, all those 20 profiles for each book, so 40 women, have literally been my mentors. So I want to discuss that a little bit. So the interesting thing is that this journey of doing research on female leadership has led me to interview Nobel laureates, scientists, human rights activists, and the wonderful part of it is that I get to invite many of these women to come to Los Angeles to come and speak to a wider group of audience. So, is this working? Is this going back, or maybe I'm holding it backwards? That may be. Okay, yes. Okay, so what does good leadership look like? I'm going to give you a little bit of a teaser, and then I'm going to go back and talk about other things. Good leadership is have vision, motivation, influence, and inspire growth, both within themselves and the people around them. You keep those 4 things in mind while I give you some more context in terms of the state of affairs of women leaders all around the world and in the US. So Dilma Rousseff, who's the president of Brazil, when she spoke at UN and said this, which I think is quite beautiful, she said that first of all, Dilma Rousseff is the first woman to become president. And I'll tell you something very interesting. I actually had the chance of doing research on her runner-up the runner-up, which was another woman from Brazil. She, incredibly enough, the story was that she was illiterate until the age of 16. And she ran for presidency. When you hear these stories, you then start thinking, what is holding me back? You know, please plant a question for yourself right now in the beginning of the day, is that what are the things that hold you back from your truest potential? What would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? What would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? If a woman who was living in the Amazon jungle with no electricity or running water and decides that she's going to learn the alphabet at the age of 16, how does she run for presidency? It's incredible. So Dilma Rousseff actually is the woman who won, and she said, I speak to you with a feminine voice. I am certain, ladies and gentlemen, that this will be the women's century. In the Portuguese language, words such as life, soul, and hope are of the feminine gender, as are words like courage and sincerity. And truly, I do think that we are embarking on a very exciting time. When you're looking at statistics, the largest sector in terms of women moving into is entrepreneurship. Women are becoming entrepreneurs at the fastest rate, and you wonder why that is. Part of the reason is what you're addressing today, which is work-life balance. A lot of women have opted that they want to have more control over their life, over their schedules. They want to have an option out of typical corporate. And so, interestingly enough, what's to me incredible is that women also note that they can use their creativity and innovation towards really investing in themselves and their ideas. And that's pretty amazing. But we still have a long way to go. So let's talk about some women's statistics. Across the public and private sectors, women are still underrepresented at the highest level of power. Women today account for only 15.2% of the board members of Fortune 500 companies, 16% of partners at the largest law firms, and 19% of the surgeons. I mean, still, it doesn't sound so good, right? Most notably, only 2% of the CEOs are women, and only 15% of the seats of the boards of directors are held by women. So, but interestingly enough, you can see Warren Buffett actually wrote an article in, I believe, in the Wall Street Journal, which was fascinating. But you can see, first of all, research shows that firms that are run by female CEOs have lower leverage, less volatile earnings, and a higher chance of survival than firms run by male CEOs. And McKinsey and NASA has shown that women leaders are particularly good at defining responsibilities clearly, as well as mentoring and coaching employees. So these are our real strengths as women leaders. What Warren Buffett latched onto a couple of years ago, which is very true, is that, women are the key to America's prosperity. And not only that, there was a recent article by the Gates Foundation saying how they're concentrating their efforts into developing women and girls all around the world, because they are the key to economic prosperity worldwide. Why? Because if you're not capitalizing on 50% of the population as an economic asset, you are not really living your full potential, right? So there is, even economically, there's a case to be made why women need to be participating at a higher level in all sectors of society. So now we go to, what does good leadership look like? And now I'm going a little bit deeper. You fulfill my vision, you extend my influence, and you make me better than I am. You fulfill my vision, you extend my influence, and you make me better than I am. Good leaders do that all the time. Good leaders will have people around them that say, when I'm with you, I know I'm doing better. I'm functioning at my best. So actually, my most recent book that came out is called Visionary Women. And in this tomb, I interviewed 20 women from all around the world. And of course, of interest to me is not only to get the Western perspective, but women's stories from Africa, from the Middle East, from Asia, South America. I discussed some legacy women, because we should always honor and remember women who've made really, they're trailblazers that open the path for other women to follow. And then I cover women who are leaders presently, or up-and-coming leaders, which is very exciting. So I'm going to start with the story of Master Chen Yin. So here we're going to embark on the storytelling and the case studies. Master Chen Yin is one of the most fascinating women. Well, I say this and I say each one of them becomes even more fascinating. I'm so sorry. It's like choosing your kids. I can't do it. So Master Chen Yin. This is a woman that came from a very, very poor province in Taiwan. At the age of 16, she decided that her path was spirituality, and she wanted to become a Buddhist monk. At the time, no women were Buddhist monks. So you see, leadership takes many, many routes. It could be through spirituality, through human rights, through business, through artistry, all of it. So Master Chen Yin, at the age of 16, although her parents were very set against it, goes and ordains herself as a monk. And she shaves her head, as all female monks do and male monks do, and becomes a monk. She had 2 or 3 followers. You know, I almost feel like I need to be walking. I'm sorry. I feel too separate from all of you. So So Master Chen Yin decides that with her 2 or 3 followers, can you guys all hear me? Okay, perfect. She decides to found her own sect of Buddhism. So this is very audacious. First of all, you say, I'm a monk myself. I don't need anybody to ordain me as a monk. And then later on, what really triggered her to found her own sect of Buddhism is because a few Christian monks actually went to her and said, you know, in our tradition, we really give back to society. It's not about really reaching nirvana or a state of peace individually, but how do we give back to society? And she turned back and said, you have a lot of merit. I do think we need to have a sect of Buddhism where you actually self-actualize through service. So her sect of Buddhism is called Buddhism through action. Okay? Would you believe that this woman who has heart problems and has never left Taiwan, and she has her headquarters in one of the poorest sections of Taiwan, very hard to get to, has an endowment that is closing to $1 billion? That's incredible. When Hurricane Katrina hit, she had thousands of volunteers dispatched to help and gave $14 million that first week. That's incredible, right? And her volunteers, it's not about religion at all. It's about community service. When they said that they need something like the Mayo Clinic in her country, she said, we'll do it. They said, you have nothing to do with building a hospital. You have no education or no training whatsoever. This is a woman that has had 8th grade education. She said, I have faith in myself that whenever the task comes up, I'll learn how to figure it out. The wisest words that anybody could say. How much faith do we have in our own abilities that we can do that? One of the biggest research findings is that the difference between men and women is that men will pick up a new job, you know, they take on a new role, they go, they ask for advancement, and they say, I'll figure it out. Women tend to say, I need to know everything about the next thing in order to embark on it, right? She's the opposite. She says, I have faith, I'll figure it out. She not only set up one of the best hospitals, not only in Taiwan, but in Asia. She has recycling centers because in their culture, there is no culture of recycling. She has done that. Nobody wanted to give bone marrow. She has bone marrow banks all over Asia. So what is happening? This is called visionary. I put vision with red. This is a visionary woman. A visionary woman who's never even stepped outside of her own country, yet is really serving the world. And to me, it comes down to this, the lessons learned. She had a grand vision, right? And that was easy to communicate. If you can't explain what you want to do very well and in easy format, then you really don't know what you want to do. I always say that. Even in organizations, they say the best leaders know how to communicate and say it in words that then people know it's easy to implement. So you break down a very large vision into steps where you know that there is some way of implementing it. The other thing is that people commit to causes and not plans. People are really touched by purpose, not goals. So what is our purpose as a leader? She was so purposeful in her plans and as a leader that people said, this has purpose, this has meaning, and that meaning appeals to me, it resonates to me. So she was able to bring so many people under her vision because they understood her purpose. So I always say the example, look at the iPhone. Do you think that people at Apple, look at their advertising, be the rebel, be an out-of-the-box thinker. What are they saying? Did they say that the iPhone is a phone? They never talked about the iPhone being a phone. They said this is a transformative device that will change your life. It's a transformative device that will help you communicate better, search things better. It will change your life. So they always go with purpose, not the function, right? I hope this is helping in some ways. So interestingly enough, there's another research that shows that when you focus on purpose, women are more likely to do things that they don't like to do. Because let's face it, all of us will have to do things throughout the day that we don't have the most enthusiasm for, but we do it nonetheless. One of the research studies shows that women actually don't like networking. You see, because we have this sense that you have to go out there and say, how can you serve me? And but first of all, if you think of networking as just connection and really put behind an agenda, and when you connect to someone on an authentic level, things fall into place in time. But when women were said that if you are going and networking for the purpose of building relationships, for the purpose of the higher good of the company, they do it. So connecting to purpose is very important in doing activities that sometimes is not something that you would naturally do. So the second thing, we were talking about influence and motivation. So the most effective women know how to gather a group of like-minded people to amplify their voice and support their vision. That's why I think conferences are important, because that's where you get like-minded women together. I feel like things like that, when you are around like-minded people, it's like you are recharging yourself. Studies show that your emotional tone is the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. That is very scary. Because then you have to start thinking, who do I spend the most time with? And what is the emotional tone of those people? And what is your own emotion? And then it makes you think, what is my emotional tone, right? So what's interesting is that best leaders, if you want to have influence and motivation, and I mean it in the nicest way, it's not about manipulation or any other way, is that good leaders understand others very well. So they're great listeners. They're great listeners, and they understand the values of others, and they build consensus. When they do that, they can mobilize people because they understand their point of view. Okay. Now, can I say that she is one of my favorite people? So Lema Bowie, I remember the first time I heard her speak, it was at a conference in New York. She had just recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I was sitting there in the darkened auditorium, and I thought to myself, how am I going to meet her? I would like to meet her. So it's very interesting because in my mind, sometimes I think of myself, oh, I'm this, I'm still, maybe I'm a Iranian girl from Iran. But when I come there, I become a lioness. I covered her in my last book, and I really think that her story is so compelling in so many ways. But it goes right into motivation and influence, and the will to change your identity. Lema's story is that, Liberia was seized with a civil war for 11 years. And during that time, she's a refugee, finishes high school, goes and marries a man, has 4 kids, is an abused wife, and living on the poverty level. She was talking to me, and she was saying how when she gave birth to her 4th child, she didn't have enough money to have a room, so she gave birth to the child in the hallway of the hospital. And after she gave birth to her 4th child, and she has 6 kids actually, so 4th child, she just said, I'm going to go back to Liberia. I'm going to leave him alone. I'm just going to rebuild my life again. That takes a tremendous amount of courage. And that is one of the things that always fascinated me when I was interviewing these women, is that those transformative moments in a person's life where they say, I'm going to turn things around, takes a lot of courage. I think bravery becomes the landmark of a visionary woman. And bravery, to me, is defined by choosing the unknown over what is known. Bravery is choosing the unknown because she didn't know what's going to happen to her next. She went back to Liberia, went back to her parents. Her parents said, we'll take care of the kids if you want to go back to school. And she went to get her degree in social work. One day, being completely fed up by the state of affairs in her country, where, young boys, 8, 9, 11 years old, completely drugged out with machine guns, coming through the cities and killing people at random. She said, I'm going to form an interfaith coalition. This woman went to church and said, there's Muslims and Christians in Liberia. She said, it's about women. It's not about anything else. I want to have an interfaith coalition of women and mothers saying we want an end to this civil war. Believe it or not, this is how she won the Nobel Prize. A battered wife, an abused wife, a single mother who over the years led a coalition that went through the entirety of Liberia, where mothers and women came and, first of all, they did a ban. They had a sex strike. That was funny. They said that, men, we're going to do a sex strike, so as long as the war is going on, nobody's going to have sex with anyone. And then I asked, did that really help? And she says, no, I think people were not really abiding by that rule, but it got her a lot of press. And so the world started noticing what she was doing. Well, the point with Lema is that I'm astounded by her audacity to say, how can I amplify my voice? And amplifying her voice was having thousands of other women behind her. And she said, if you're going to lead, you have to recognize that your enthusiasm and your expressiveness are amongst your strongest allies in your efforts to generate commitment in others. This, to me, also means that when something is really meaningful to you, when something has meaning to you and you can articulate it in that very way, it affects another person. It really does. I want to talk about Zhang Xin. Okay, she's Chinese, and another interesting thing about work-life balance. I mean, right now Lema is with another, she is married now. She just recently got married. And I had her come and speak in Los Angeles maybe 6 months ago. But she said something that is very true, and I always have said it, is that the biggest career move for a woman, if she wants to get married, is her choice in her husband. If you choose to marry, the biggest career move is who you choose as a husband. Because even the women that I researched, so many of them had husbands who were their equal partners, that the husbands are pushing, actually, the woman to excel, to go ahead. And that is incredible. So I always say there's a lot of male feminists out there that need to be given credit to as well. So Zhang Xin is the founder of China's largest developer and prime commercial real estate. She has built more of Beijing than any emperor in China's history. She, of course, is the 6th richest woman in the world. So, more wealthy than Oprah, Trump, and all those other people that we think. Would you know that she was homeless for a while? I don't know if you've ever seen her 60-minute segment. If you haven't, you should go and see it. But during the Chinese Revolution, she was in a work camp with her mom. Later on, her mom came to the city because she could serve as a translator, and they were homeless. She would sleep in the offices with a book underneath her as a pillow. She went to Hong Kong and she worked in the assembly line. And then she saved up her money so that she could just apply and go abroad to study. She went to London. And at the same time, while she was getting her degree, she saw that China was changing. So when I was talking about influence and motivation, we were saying people are good listeners, good leaders are good listeners, and they understand the value of their constituency, right? So she thought the time is ripe that she goes back to China. And she starts with her husband building apartment buildings that was very much in keeping with the rising middle class in China. China, for the first time, was having a rising middle class, and their value system was, we want to keep some of the traditions of Chinese culture, yet we want to have big windows, we want to have light, vibrant colors, but yet, she would have a separate area for like the elder parents to live. So she really created a niche for herself that all of China embraced. So in order to actually be a good leader, you really need to know who your constituency is and how you're going to serve them. So her story is incredible, from homeless to being one of the most successful women in the world. And she's young. I mean, she has 2 kids. She's probably 50 now. Incredible. So, and then the third thing I want to talk about, I said, so far, what was it? Vision, influence, and motivation. Now we're going to go to growth. The most significant contribution leaders make is not simply to today's bottom line. It is to the long-term development of people and institutions so they can adapt, change, prosper, and grow. As a matter of fact, if as a leader you ask most successful leaders what is their forte is the province of change. A leader, their main thing is how they're going to adapt and change. So what good leaders do is that they liberate the vision that's already steering there. They liberate the vision. Okay, so I have Jacqueline Novogratz. She was a woman that I interviewed and covered in my second book. Jacqueline, as a matter of fact, when I interviewed her, she hadn't gotten the Forbes Pioneer Woman title yet. But Jacqueline's husband, just talking about a power couple, Jacqueline's husband is the CEO of TED Talks. And Jacqueline, which, you know, I'm going to backtrack. Another thing that you'll see in a lot of successful women. So what do we see? We not only talk about bravery, but a lot of these women, they started out in disciplines that had nothing to do with what they're doing now. She was a banker. I mean, Lima was unemployed, right? So Jacqueline was a banker, and she was, you know, in her late 20s, she went to Brazil one day on behalf of the bank. And she was seeing the poor, you know, living in the favelas in Rio. Went back to her boss and said, you know, I'm wondering if there's any way that we can give microloans to people who want to start up businesses, who really are marginalized and would really benefit from a loan. And her boss looked at her and said, you are out of your mind. And please do not mention this to anybody else. Nobody will take you seriously. And by the way, you dress not appropriately for a banker and all of that. She just came back and she said, I'm leaving the job. So what is she doing now that she has become one of the foremost experts worldwide on unleashing the potential of other people? She is truly, truly a spectacular woman. She is the CEO of Acumen, which is a nonprofit global venture fund. So what she does is that she went back to business school. She went to Stanford Business School and decided that she's going to invest in businesses that serve the needs of the most marginalized people in the world. That means clean water, housing, shelter, electricity, any of that, where a new entrepreneur says, I know the cheapest way of providing the cleanest water. I just need some capital to do it. She says, I'll give you the capital, and I'll give you a team to grow this vision, and then I treat it as an investment. So if you make money, it goes back into the fund. So her fund is not only business, but it's part venture and part nonprofit. Very interesting. But throughout the years, she has affected, well, I said 125 million people in the past, you know, decade, actually. And she's listed as one of the top, one of the 25 most successful graduates of all time from Stanford. And you can imagine how many great Stanford graduates are out there. So what I'm trying to say is that she goes by the whole thing of, I want to unleash the potential of every single person I touch, that I work with. And with that, she's giving them wings to develop. And what's interesting is that she also cues in on purpose. When I asked her, what is her purpose? She said that I want people to live with dignity. That's what she talks about. It's not about, okay, I'm going to give you 10 million so you can do. It's living with dignity. And she wants to see what's the most effective way of doing that. So lessons learned. To reach your potential as a leader, you must grow, and you must be highly intentional about it. And I always say that, you know, we're very lucky when we're students. We have a way of going back and forth into a learning space where we're growing. But it is our responsibility after we graduate to continue educating ourselves. Life is a big school in itself. So we have to remain open. But we have to be very intentional about how we're growing as people and as leaders. As a leader, you have to cast a very large vision for yourself so you can guide your own growth. So don't look at yourself what I want to do 5 years from now, what is the largest vision that you have of yourself? I oftentimes say, when people come to me and say, I want to do this, but I don't know if I'm going to be successful. And I say, what's the downside? You always have to think, if the downside isn't so bad, why don't you do it anyway? Because through that, you will open so many other doors, and it'll take you somewhere else that you never thought you would before. And you'll build on skills that you never had before. Okay, so I talked about the formal education. And then the other thing is that you also have to be committed to the growth of your team. So as leaders, not only are we role models for growth, but we want to offer the people on our team to that opportunity that they're growing as people. That's how they align with you. So I want to take 1 second and ask each of you to pair up with one person and say, what holds you back from your truest potential today, at this moment? What holds you back? You have 1 minute. I think, it seems almost bipolar, unfortunately. For lack of a better word, I'm a psychology. The other part is that because they hear the tech boom, my son graduated from Stanford himself. But let me tell you, every Stanford kid comes out and thinks that they can do an app, be the next Uber, and they're going to be, thank God my son didn't feel that way. But he's in an environment, and all his friends are in an environment where they think that the next idea is going to make them millionaires. And that is a very inflated way of looking at things. So that's one of the things. The other thing that is interesting, and studies are coming up in terms of attention span and working with technology, that how little we pay attention to reading. Now if people are reading through the blogs I write for the Huffington Post, I say, write in 3-sentence paragraphs because nobody's going to read. I mean, how much can you impart in 3 sentences per paragraph and make it? So it'll be very interesting to see how that really affects the dissemination of information, because if it's all visual and a few words, what are we really getting at? But another thing that has been very interesting is a real push for even business schools to say, don't replace meetings, face-to-face meetings, or picking up the phone to talk with texting for work. Take the time to really see someone. If there's a problem, pick up the phone. These are not things, because you can, tone gets lost in a text. And so oftentimes when I'm writing something, I wonder, I go, will that person think I'm angry? Or maybe I should pick up the phone, right? So I do think that millennials have a completely different outlook. They want to live in urban places. They don't want to be in suburban. They don't want to live in suburbia. They are getting much later. Some of them choose not to be married. They do want to do things that has global reach. So it'll be interesting to see. But most interesting is that the big challenge for higher educational institutions is training these next workforce for work that has never been done before. So they're not being trained to be an engineer, so you're training them to think, to process information, and to get themselves ready for work that will be created sometime else that we have no idea what it is. Yes?
I was interested in your statement about seeing yourself as a personal corporation.
Yes.
And creating your own board.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the type of board you would recommend that we set up. Are these peers, people who are further along in their career, further behind in their career? How do people encourage you on your board?
Okay. So I want to turn the question and ask you, what do you think? Thank you. Yes, I think it's a mix. And it's very personal to yourself. And what's also very interesting is that each of us have our own definitions of success. You know, another great study is that the happiest women, the women who are most fulfilled in their life, which I call that, fulfillment and success are to me the same, right? Is that they define their own way of success. So you have to say, there's certain stages in your life that one thing takes precedence over another. I'm sorry, I'm going to be controversial, or maybe not, it doesn't matter, but that's my point of view, that you cannot have everything all at the same time. I think, you know, it's a myth. Why put ourselves through this kind of, you know, there's a really interesting book that I had read where even, you know, 30 years ago, nobody thought that women have to have excellent physiques, they have to look so good, and then they have to be the best mothers, and they have to be PTA president and be a CEO. It wasn't there. And who is buying into it? Whatever you want to be, that's okay. But are there stages in our lives that one thing takes precedence over another? I absolutely think that's what I thought. You know, that worked with my life. So then you have to think, your board members may change based on the life stage that you're at. And if you want to, you know, and what you're trying to get at. But don't always think that those people ahead of you are your teachers. That's, I think, one of the things. So, and peers are interesting, but definitely having people that have no day-to-day connection with you is even more interesting. Yes.
Okay, I come from probably okay, thank you, that's a good idea. Okay, I'm Diana Hyatt-Michael. I'm probably the person the longest here at Pepperdine in this room, because I've started here back in 1974. So if you need a historian, you got me. But my question is, I'm part of the builder generation, the generation that sometimes the younger people forget.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, we come with a different set of skills. Like I was thinking on the way here, how much we spend our time reflecting versus everybody's texting and quick. So what can we offer the people that are younger, like this lovely young lady I had a chance to meet this morning?
I think you have so much to offer.
Okay, now be very specific now.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
I've done research for too long.
Yeah. No. And I think what you just said, you nailed it. I have a speaker. Obviously, I don't know your personal characteristics, but and I'm a big believer that the best leaders are the most self-reflective. And I said it in some way in my speech. And self-reflection takes time. And depth in a personality takes time. Depth does not happen when you're always around people, and depth doesn't happen when you're constantly distracted. So if you want to have even true innovation means that you need to have your eyes out for a while, and like any innovative, creative process, you need to go into a cocoon for a while and re-emerge. And I think that natural wisdom sometimes gets lost because we're constantly distracted. So what do you have to teach? I would think that's the wisdom to say each one of us, we all have our own personal path, and the ways may be different, but the skills are yet the same. I don't think anything about leadership has changed nothing has changed. And the funny thing is that when I did all the cross-cultural studies, is that leadership looks the same across cultures. The traits that make a leader a fine leader, it's not dependent on culture. Even I think some women have a propensity for things that make them a certain kind of leader, but leadership is leadership. And in the beginning, it comes from self-reflection. Or you can't have vision, you don't know and then you have to be so self-aware that when you're in an environment, you can also pick up the tone of other people around you. If you're just conducting yourself in a cocoon or based on what you think is right, I'll tell you a really interesting story. I was serving on a board of an educational institution, and the head of school had an evaluation. And the biggest comment, feedback, was that he needs to be more self-aware. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Because if you're self-aware, you're a better listener. You listen to yourself and you listen to other people. I hope I answered it in some way. I hope so. Yes. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation, Angela. A lot of valuable information. One of the things that I took away is the point that you made about the importance of having a clear vision and then being able to communicate it very simply. So what is some coaching that you give to somebody if they don't have a clear vision, or they have a vision but they can't really communicate it in those simple terms?
Okay. Those are two different and very big questions. So one is that let's break it down now. You see, I always say, if you want to do something simple, you have to break it down. So that's answer number one. So how do you have a vision for yourself? You guys tell me, what do you think? Any suggestions? Okay.
You start by asking yourself what drives you the most at your core. What's your purpose?
Yes.
Like you had said in one of your earlier slides.
Absolutely. So I think this is where we go back to self-reflection, is that you need to know exactly who you are. And in uncovering who you are, that means that you need to know what you're good at, number one. Number two, what drives you? You know, Joseph Campbell said something that I also think is very important, is that people are not driven to be happy, not happy. They're driven to have meaning in their lives. They're driven to wake up in the morning and feel alive. So what gives you a sense of aliveness? What really brings the life force into your body? So these are the basic things that we need to first ask in terms of vision. And then another thing that it's my own personal experience, and I know that there's so many incredible women here that can offer another point of advice, is that many times in my life, I was a psychology professor. I came out and I did something else, and then I'm writing books and speaking at conferences. I never thought that I'm going to do one thing for the rest of my life. I just didn't. And I was open to the fact that I knew that all of that training in psychology and my teaching would lead me, all those skills would lead me here. So I can talk without feeling nervous, right? So when you're, teaching a class all day long, you can do that. So to me, I think is that oftentimes I said, if something seems interesting enough, I'm going to do it and see how it feels. If it feels good, I don't mind doing the hard work. I'm never afraid of hard work. I just want to make sure what I'm doing is meaningful to me. And it's really doing something for other people too. I mean, if it's not making an impact, then I have to reassess how well I'm doing something, right? And then when it feels better to me, I always am very intentional about my years. So as this new year started in January, I sat down and I don't ever say, I want to go to the gym. I don't, all those things are just, I'm intentional about my growth. So I said, this year, what kind of experiences do I want to give myself? How can I grow as a woman? How can I grow? And what does that mean to me? How am I impacting my family, my community, and my work? And write it in simple language for yourself. And let that vision guide you through the year. And you come back and say, did that feel right for me? What is there I need to tweak? We need to have pivot points. There's another interesting book called The Startup of You, which is the founder of LinkedIn has written. And it says that entrepreneurship is in our DNA. That means all of us are entrepreneurs of our own lives. And so all good entrepreneurs have pivot points. You may be facing a pivot point. And so you need to see some options, do it, and see how it feels, reflect, and then change course or maybe stay on that course. Does that help? Can someone else offer something else? Maybe I'm sure there's some, please.
Well, I often think that sometimes we cannot clearly craft a vision for ourselves because we fail to adequately address the challenges in our lives, our negative experiences, and we get stuck in them because we won't identify them and we won't identify how we overcame them. So perhaps you from your psychological perspective, can address that for us. The negative experiences in our lives often shape and guide us to the direction that we should be in. Can you
Very
please?
well said, very well said. So I do want to say, when we say what's holding you back from your truest potential, when you look at that and you look at personal, if you are constantly saying it's somewhere out in the outside world, something is going on. That is that there's lack of personal responsibility on your end or on our end. So one of the, in research, is that negative self-talk is one of the biggest forces in our lives that lead us astray. So so some of the big things is that I don't know enough. Who am I to be asking for this? You know that most women don't go to their bosses to ask for a raise. Who am I to do this? And then also, it's very interesting that a lot of women, when they have the great ideas, don't even want to share it in a boardroom. So these are the things that the negative self-talk, the myths that I need to know more, have more training. Also, even when they want to pitch for loans, you know, it's right now, it shows that most people, they can get microloans. They can. It's very easy to get microloans. But those women who are leading mid-size businesses have a very hard time getting loans. So part of it is, there's twofold. There may be some sort of bias that's involved, but there's also, when you talk to certain kind of people who interview them, say that that kind of confidence that I'm going to make it happen isn't coming through. Isn't coming through. So I do think, you know, interestingly enough, you know, in my third book, around 70% of the people that I researched, they had their biggest career move at midlife. I do want to say that it's very interesting. And I think there's a reason for that, because probably at around midlife, a lot of us have dealt with some of that stuff already, or we're dealing with it. There's one more other thing that I wanted to talk about, and Malcolm Gladwell talked about it, and I wrote it in my book as well. A lot of the women who are real leaders, they're very good with people, right? They know how to connect with people because they're leading movements, they're making... The interesting thing is that they don't care about social acceptance, though. As good as they are socially, they can withstand criticism and social pressure. But it makes sense, right? If you're going through the world and you're saying, I want to do this differently, and you cannot withstand criticism, then you're not going to be doing your job well. So how do we build that muscle? I think that is another thing, is that anything we do is a habit. How do we get into the habit of looking outside and blaming others Whereas we can also nurture some of those inner skills ourselves to answer back appropriately without, flaring up, answering back appropriately, and also nurturing our own inner confidence that we can handle situations and we can handle criticism. Right. Any other questions? Yeah.
We're gonna, so sorry. We are going to need to wrap up there, but I did want to, first of all, thank you again. Ladies, would you join me in thanking Angela?